In terms of neural traffic, it sends more neural traffic up to the brain than vice versa. So this whole idea of us just being big brains with bodies that keep the brain healthy is really an old model. It's an antiquated model. Mapping the nervous system of the heart, the fact that the heart has a brain of 40,000 neurons, has sensory neurites. It operates independently of the thinking brain in many, many ways. It's been reclassified as an endocrine gland. So it's a whole new field right now.
Welcome to the podcast that guides men to demystify and develop their intuition. I'm your host, Doug Bites. Let's dig into the science and expand your horizons. My guest today is Jeff Goelitz, Director of Education at the HeartMath Institute. Jeff is an experienced education consultant, curriculum developer, and senior trainer who leads the expansion of HeartMath's educational programs. He works closely with educators, mental health professionals, parents, and young people across the US, Mexico, and Canada to support youth well-being, strengthen parent-child communication, and improve classroom climate and performance. He's developed numerous social and emotional learning programs and co-authored publications, including Using M-Wave Technology for Children with ADHD, the College De-Stress Handbook, and Transforming Stress for Teens. He has also been a key contributor to several online programs, including the award-winning Smart Brain Wise Heart program. In addition, Jeff is actively involved in research exploring educator and student well-being using heart rate variability as a key measure of resilience and regulation. Jeff, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Doug.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I thought maybe we could start off with you giving us a brief history of why and how HeartMath started in the first place, and then what was the attraction for you to join in with them?
Thank you. Yes, it actually started in 1991, and I shake my head that I've been around that long, along with many others, but it was about, let's say, 35 of us that launched this. It was led by the founder named Doc Childre, and the idea behind it was to build an organization that put a lot more emphasis on the heart, rather than just strictly the brain, because we've lived in such a brain-dominant world, and we felt that there was a missing component in intelligence and in our relationships, the heart. So we all kind of got together and rather organically knew we need to grow it, and you have to grow that by building a business. And we all had different roles. I was previously a teacher, so I was director of education. We had some engineers who led the development of the HeartMath science, which I'll get into a little bit. And we had people with government and personal development. So we had all these different lanes that we're in, even though we interacted. And the key to kind of making the heart more than just kind of a soft-sounding Disney-like concept is to talk about the heart as kind of the center of who we are. If you look in the Webster's Dictionary, you see the heart, number one, is a pump. Two, it's the center of who we are. So we want to promote more of this inner strength as the heart, that it's used metaphorically through society. But we had to develop science to kind of get past that wall of skepticism. And we did some real serious science with the help of a lot of really smart people, collaborators, researchers, professors, authors. And here we are, 35 years later. We've grown exponentially. We're in many, many different sectors of society. We have 500 peer-reviewed research articles done by third-party organizations, a bunch by ourselves as well as in a lot of Fortune 500 companies who work with athletes in schools, the Army, the military, and so on.
Wow. Okay. So what was the attraction for you? You were already in education in one way, and then you heard about this, or you were already associates with some of the people who started it?
Well, it was kind of a loose connection of people. Some of us knew each other, some of us didn't, but Doc Childre laid out this vision of the heart, that there's this intelligence in the heart, there's empowerment in the heart, and that was attractive. especially as someone who's former athlete. But I had anxiety. I had the typical normal insecurity that goes on, even though I was pretty good at my work career. So there was kind of something else, another dimension of humanness that I think drew me to this. And to explore the heart in more depth. So it was a personal attraction, as well, even from a learning model, the need for more heart-like qualities in education for students to learn.
Okay, so let's just talk about the word heart for a minute, because that was the change. So yeah. We've all physically got a heart, as you mentioned earlier, and it pumps blood through our bodies. So we're looking at that, but are you also very much looking at I don't know how to describe it now, but something that's not this physical thing in our body. It's the heart of us, the center of us. Are you also investigating some other invisible thing there that we would call the heart, because it's the center of who we are? Is there more to it, or are you guys just really looking at the physical things, how the physical heart in our chest connects to the brain, connects to other parts of our bodies? Like, I'm curious there.
Yeah, no, I think the simple answer is all the above, Doug. Meaning, if you look at the heart historically, going back thousands of years, it's always considered a source of power. Be still and know, your heart knows. And it was kind of called, in the Catholic religion, they call it the sacred heart. So there's something, the depth of who we are, that's where we feel our spirituality. That's where we feel who we are. We not just think it, but we feel it. And then came along William Harvey, the British scientist, who pretty much, after numerous investigations, just concluded the heart is just a pump. And then you had Descartes and all that, where you have it's all the brain. So the shift happened dramatically in the neuroscience, and heart was kind of cast aside as just a pump or a sweet little metaphor. And that was, from a neuroscience point of view, incorrect. But we also knew intuitively that the heart had a lot of different dimensions. So you mentioned it has the physical pump that beats 100,000 times a day. That's a lot, so it's going 24/7. But the heart also has a nervous system. It has dendrites and neurons mirroring what the brain has. It has memory. It's an endocrine gland. It secretes at least 2 hormones that we know. And it also, in terms of neural traffic, it sends more neural traffic up to the brain than vice versa. So this whole idea of us just being big brains with bodies that keep the brain healthy is really an old model. It's an antiquated model. Now we know it's very much a two-way street. You've got to include the body. You also have to include the heart. But we would also suggest that there's a depth in the heart. If we can now quiet down this mind to some degree, and it's active a lot, as we know, when you listen to the heart, there's a stillness. And maybe there's a voice, maybe there's an intuition. It takes practice to cultivate that. Children have a lot more that we would say it kind of launches you into this other sphere or this other room. It's called a dimension. That could be too mystical for some people. But there's these other capacities when we experience our heart that the brain alone cannot experience itself. So it's multifaceted. It's still a metaphor, but it's also a spiritual element. It's also a complicated field called neurocardiology, the nervous system of the heart. And that's a whole new science body that's been developed.
So we're going to have neuroscientists of the heart. Like, do we have them now, or are you saying that's going to be?
We very much have it. Yeah, there's a book written in 1991 called Neurocardiology, mapping the nervous system of the heart, the fact that the heart has a brain of 40,000 neurons, has sensory neurites. It operates independently of the thinking brain in many, many ways. It's been reclassified as an endocrine gland. So it's a whole new field right now, and in particular, what's kind of hot in science right now is measuring and monitoring the traffic from the nervous system of the heart up to the brain, up to what's called the vagus nerve. And we do that a lot because we put electrodes in the heart, or we even have sensors that do that. And there's terms that we didn't develop that existed in the 70s and 80s, a long time ago, 50 years ago, called cortical inhibition or cortical facilitation. And the key to that is, what's our emotional state? If we're frustrated or angry or depressed, those neural signals coming from the nervous system of the heart are going to inhibit the brain. Try making a decision when you're frustrated versus when you're calm, when you're loving, you're more care. Those signals will traffic all the way up to the cortical brain, and you're going to have cortical facilitation. So it's hardcore science right now that is getting much more a wide appeal, since when we first began promoting heart intelligence, or the power of the heart, which was an uphill climb, to be honest with you. But neuroscience has advanced. The research studies are in abundance out there. And I could just casually mention several studies that just talk about the vagus nerve from major institutions that are government funded. So the credibility is out there right now, and we're not fighting that as much because just the brain alone cannot do it. You need the body, you need the support of the heart to be a full human being.
Interesting. And you talked about there's two hormones that the heart produces. So I'm assuming there, because, people get hormonal imbalance. And I don't know how many other hormones are in the body. I'm not a medical stud person. But I'm imagining there, if things aren't right in our heart, where those hormones aren't going to be produced correctly or whatever. So it's quite important. And obviously that's a physical thing, but I would imagine that would then reach out to the emotions as well. If our emotions were out of whack, it could upset the production of those hormones coming from the heart as well. So, yeah, and that's not something I've heard a lot talked about before, like these hormones from the heart.
It's still kind of a peripheral piece of knowledge. I think it was University of Montreal said that, like, oxytocin, for females that are living out there, they know that when you're pregnant, or have a baby, you have this love hormone, the oxytocin. So University of Montreal said it's not only in the brain, but it's in the heart. But I would also stress it's not the heart development or the production of hormones is tied very much to autonomic nervous system regulation. And you hear that a lot right now. I hear it a lot when we're working with schools or students, that the students are dysregulated. Their nervous system is imbalanced, meaning they have too much sympathetic fight or flight going on in their system, and the parasympathetic, or the vagus nerve, the kind of the slowing down, is less active. And that creates that nervous system balance, and that will affect hormone production and release.
Mm. And so when you guys use the word coherence, is that describing what we've just been, what I was asking you about, the non-physical part of the heart? Like, is that where the coherence is coming in? Explain that one. Again, this is kind of a layered question, but it's like, if you look at coherence as a term classically from physics, when there's harmony between waves, of things are working together, they're coherent. Or you could even think of it in our everyday language, that man was inebriated, so he was very incoherent. We couldn't understand. He couldn't string his sentences together in a way that made sense. So coherence in this sense is togetherness or harmony or working together. And our original research from American Journal of Cardiology in 1995, and that was one of those research papers with the help of a Stanford scientist that kind of put us on the map a little bit. But there we looked at the nervous system. You have the sympathetic down the back. You have two wires there, and that's mostly brain down the body. That's the fight or flight. That's what speeds up the heart rate. Go, go, go. Then the front, you have the parasympathetic, or the vagus nerve. So there's this constant teeter-totter going on between those two. But we get imbalance because we're human beings. We have to interact with the environment in very dynamic ways. It's not just stress. It's like you're going to have to lift something, or get off off a chair and you have to move or run or get for exercise. You're going to have a lot more sympathetic drive. But what's happening for us in our day-to-day life, maybe when we're sitting in a chair or in a car, there's this imbalance. We get a little bit too amped up or overreacting to life. And there's that physiological balance that happens like that.
And so what we teach people to do is to try to kind of breathe through the heart. I can guide us through an exercise later on. Just get that breath kind of deeper and even try to generate something you appreciate, like for a pet or a mate or a friend or a place in nature. And then that teeter-totter effect starts showing balance. And you can actually see that in the heart rhythms, where there's a series of heartbeats going up, series of heartbeats going down, these beautiful peaks and valleys. And that's what we call coherence. It's a balance between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. We can measure that in detail. We've done it many, many times. So it's an actual state, this state of coherence of self-control, calm, poised, not perfect because we're on the go a lot. So we have to have kind of a coherence carryover effect, if you will. But it's just a more manageable state where we get our brain thinking better, our body and our mind and our brain and our heart are working together rather than fighting one another. For instance, look at just the classical experience of frustration. We all have it, where you want something to happen, but there's obstacles in the way. You're being blocked. So you want to move forward, but you're stopped. You kind of have to slow down and constrict yourself, right? Try to think clearly when you are frustrated like that. You just can't very well. You're going to make poor decisions. You're cortically inhibited. Whereas if you just kind of calm down and pause, and that's a nice cliche, but to actually do it, breathe through the heart, maybe generate some appreciation, just take 2 or 3 minutes to kind of resettle or remanage your nervous system. And that gives your brain power more capacity. And then, boom, the light bulb goes on sometimes. And you have an intuition. This is the right way to go forward. This is a more balanced approach. This is a right solution or attitude to have in this particular situation. So it's just a more conscious state. We talk about coherence that is measured not only physically and scientifically, but we also feel it inside ourselves. We're more in control rather than dependent on external situations kind of calling the shots.
So you talk about measuring it. Are you just connecting up the heart normally with normal heart or brain monitors? And is that how you're measuring the coherence or some other way?
Yeah, I'm going to take the liberty of pulling this out. This is a sensor called the Coherence Plus. And you put a sensor on your ear, so you're measuring the pulse and the space between the pulse, and then you turn this thing on, and then on your phone, you start to get feedback. And essentially what's happening here, Doug, is that if you put the clip on your ear, that measures your pulse. We measure something called heart rate variability, and that's the space between each love dub. Can contrast it with the space between each love dub when I'm running. So it narrows and it widens. As we breathe in, it widens. As we breathe out, it narrows. That's heart rate variability. It's constantly happening all the time. And so what we're measuring is the time intervals between each heartbeat or love dub, called heart rate variability or HRV. And again, that was our original research in the American Journal of Cardiology. When we had more self-control, then those rhythms are going to show up more even, more balanced, not erratic, all over the place like the state of frustration. And then we evaluate that according to what we call coherence scores. And we just did a recent study, which is really interesting. The largest biofeedback study ever done, over 1,800,000 sessions. That's a lot. About 68,000 people tracked over 2 years, 2020 and 2021. And these people were using one of our sensors called the inner balance on their phones. And they had a self-report with their scores, their coherence scores, whether they were feeling good and light or not so great. And there's a direct correlation between higher coherence scores and you're feeling more emotionally stable or uplifted versus when you're feeling low and you have lower coherence scores. That was published in a big science research article recently, journal rather. So we know from that massive number, like, again, a really large biofeedback study, that if you have more self-control, if you have more coherence, you're going to have elevated moods in general, and your brain's going to function better, and your performance is going to improve.
Sounds like what we needed. Like a bit over 40 years ago, I became a professional firefighter, and back in that day, I can remember our instructors that they needed some instruction in heart coherence to bring their level of anxiety down, and one of them was always anxious because he was a brand newly promoted officer, and he felt under the pump. He had to perform, and he was constantly on edge. So he kept all of us trainees on edge, while he was, while the hierarchy were watching him train us. And it was like, it could have been a lot smoother and probably with better results had we all been a little bit more coherent. And and they used to start a day. We had to, we'd have to go and do a 20-minute run around up the street, down, everywhere. Instead of doing that, if we'd have, once or twice a week practice some mindfulness or some, to get our hearts more in coherence, I think our learning and et cetera would have, been a lot better, and taught us to handle emergency situations a lot better as well. I've been.
You mentioned an interesting point there with the example of firefighters, or you widen it to first responders. And we work with enough of them, whether it's police officers or people driving emergency vehicles, firefighters, or even soldiers going into battle. We know enough now that the world's changed a lot. They know that they have to be calm. They have their wits about it because they're in very dangerous situations. And if they're overreacting or panic, or their heart rate's going too high, they're going to make poor decisions. So, and that's what I admire about first responders, because if there's an accident and someone's hurt and there's a lot of pain going on, they keep their emotions in check. They know they're managing themselves, and they might even have the self-awareness, emotional intelligence to know that what their tendencies are is to get frustrated or frightened or panic, and that affects everyone around them, a term called emotional contagion. That affects everybody around them. So that, in the way they're the baseline of calm. To better or less, to some degree, they have to have that baseline of calm. Otherwise, it's going to affect everybody. So there's a lot, what we call loosely the first responder response. If you're going into a situation, be like a first responder. Be calm in the face of challenge or difficulty, just like athletes. We go into events. We just witnessed the Olympics and the Winter Olympics in Milan. We did train indirectly a couple of the athletes there. They have to prep for these high performance events, and if they don't, the results show. So it's a big area for us, is working with first responders to help them cope with a lot of difficulty, but also importantly is the long-term effects. If they don't reset their nervous system is going to be hyped up. Even if they're fairly calm in that situation, there is this accumulation over time that affects their diets, their choices, their relationships, their decisions. And this has been well studied, and they get into PTSD. And that's a quiet illness that can affect them, and it eventually shows up in their physical body. And that's why we're going to be doing I won't talk about too much, but we're going to be doing a sleep study with a clinic in Texas. And this is with soldiers who have had PTSD. And the way the PTSD shows up, one of the ways anyway, is sleep disorders, because their systems have been kind of hijacked by stress. And so they remain in this elevated stress state, even though they're trying to be calm, but they've had so many years of accumulation that their nervous system is adjusted to this new baseline of being imbalanced or incoherent. So we're going to hopefully do that study in this summer. and it'll be a pretty good research study. And we'll see if anything emerges from it. We think we can help some of those soldiers who served their country bravely.
Yeah, that's awesome. Very, very much needed. It's I just know when I was 19, that's when I joined, and I was very green. I had no wisdom of how things happen or run. I just followed along, and it was challenging. And then I left the fire service a little over 20 years ago and went off and started a business and did things. And I've still kept in contact. My brother was still there for quite a few years. But just recently, I heard of one of the guys I worked with a lot. He was having his retirement party. And so I went along and saw a lot of guys that I hadn't seen for 20 years. Now, some of them you recognized immediately, and they were just, they'd barely changed, and they were, had a happy countenance. Others, I literally did not recognize them. And it took me several minutes to realize who they were, and we all physically change, etc. But you could just see that some were managing their lives so much differently than others, and some of them, you just thought, wow, you have been quite challenged with this life. They've been firefighters for 40 years doing shift work, and we're in a tourist area, and it's relatively busy with high-rise building alarms, etc., which aren't, they're not stressful situations, but at 2 a.m. you're being woken, and we used to go to bed between 10 and 11 p.m., get up by sort of 5:30, 6 a.m. if there was no calls and you're at a quiet station. But at some of these other busier stations, the guys would go out 3, 4, 5 times a night for 30 to 60 minutes, just for a non-emergency thing to try and sort it out. And just all that broken sleep and when I left a little over 20 years ago, there was the only thing that was in place to help them emotionally was free counselling. But for a year and a half, I was the work health and safety officer at a desk. And so I managed all that sort of thing, and I knew nobody was using it. I would have known if someone was using the system, and the guys just wouldn't. They just did it. So, and I hope since then that they're doing something at the training college, etc. To hopefully.
Well, we are actually with some colleagues. We're actually doing that in Santa Ana College in Southern California. We're working with a team of therapists, and they're actually teaching these pre-firefighters in the training school heart coherence techniques. Great. Because they know the long term. So slowly but surely it's starting to get in bed, just like we saw in the U.S. military, which is always the mission was always about being combat ready. Then a couple wars happened, and then they saw the end results of the soldiers, PTSD, and then the costs of helping someone overcome is too much of a stretch, deal with PTSD is exorbitant. So they actually shift their mission a little bit, and we had a role in that. That resilience became more of a priority for soldiers in battle. That's because that's what the times demanded. So there's an evolution going on here, slowly but surely, as needed, because mental health is a big deal. More and more, it's getting past the stigma. I work a lot with kids, and I see there's less of a stigma or an embarrassment or humiliation to admit you have anxiety, or even you're seeing a therapist. It's like, oh yeah, I understand. Who wouldn't be anxious growing up in this world? But we're also seeing it the same with the mental health of first responders or first responder wannabes. That it's an important ingredient now, that it's indispensable if you want to have a long career, if you want to be productive, let alone the anti-aging factor that can take place. If you don't have some work-life balance, if you don't have a way to recharge your battery, that's what we say. We talk about the battery gets depleted. When you have too much stress and you want to find ways of renewing it, whether it's sleep, that would be number one, exercise, mental health, good solid relationships, and some kind of internal practice where you kind of find your North Star, where you kind of find your bearings. This is who I am and this is what's important, but you have to listen to that voice. Hard to do with all the noise of the world going on, but it's a worthy process, a worthy endeavor, because it's the difference between having a fuller life and a life that's somewhat broken.
Oh yeah, and I know here in Australia the mindset here it's getting a lot better. But you know, we watch a lot of American TV, and we hear you guys talk about, you know, having a therapist, going to therapy, and in Australia it's like we don't do that stuff. Like, it's just like we're tough. You know, it's just like you just got to tough it out. So it's. And when I left the fire service 20 years ago, like in my state, there were no female firefighters. There are now, but they were just on the edge of it. Probably a year or two after I left, they got the first one. Right. So it was a boys' club when I was there. Like, and if anyone knew you were off seeing a therapist, you like. The one quality everyone said you had to be a professional firefighter was a thick skin. Because you were going to get, like, you just had to, you're sitting around the lunch table and you've got all these very clever people who are, and if there's no fire calls or emergency calls for, you know, of any value, like seriousness for days or weeks or months, sometimes that happens. You know, the other shifts are getting the emergencies. Your shift's not getting anything. These guys are sitting around, and the banter and the practical jokes and the tricks, and just because they're bored. And then the thought, if you said you were going to therapy, oh boy, like you would be ostracized. They would be just like, they wouldn't tease you about it. They would be like, oh wow, let's, you know. So it's a real challenging one, that one, but they just don't get the benefits of the whole thing. And you know, they've got a predetermined thought process on what therapy is, and it's nothing like what they're thinking it is. It's very different. And then, you know, the standard self-help things that like HeartMath teach people, etc., just to do those things for sort of 15 minutes or 10 minutes before you got in the car and went to work. The value for that, for your day and for your life and for your how you age, as you said, like just massive difference. And that's what I saw at this get together with, like, you know, probably 80 or 90 people who were there. And I probably knew half of them because I'd been away a fair while. But yeah, you'd see some of them you'd talk to and you were like, man, you've barely aged in 20 years. And then some others, it's like, you've aged like 50 years in the last 20 years, because I don't even like, I can't believe you know, you're almost 1 or 2 years different to me in age, but I'm just taken back. I'm thinking you look 20 years older than me in my mind. I don't know what they do, but to me they do. And I'm just like shocked and thinking, wow, you've not handled the stress of this job well. And
I would suggest with that, that it's, if you look at kind of like your decision making, how you choose to live, how you choose to sleep, what you eat, whether you get exercise, your relationships, which is one of the first areas that shows up if you're really stressed out, there's kind of a central core there that if you can find some moments to pause, reflect, listen to your heart, which sounds still quaint in some circles like that, then if you look at performance, mental health, wellness, even look at performance. We've trained a couple Olympic athletes who won shooting competitions. So your reaction speed actually increases. Whereas if you've got kind of a split self, your brain is thinking about this, your body has an ache, you're kind of split screen, you're going to be a little slow to respond. That's why we've done some work with top military elites like the Green Berets, or Navy SEALs. And if you talk to them about emotional intelligence, they're right there. Why? It's not some sissy thing. It's because they know they have to manage these instruments, these bodies, these minds, these emotions, if they're going to survive, let alone help their brethren or sister in the field. So this is, that's why when we work with them, I met a few, it's like, oh my gosh. you're going against stereotype here. And they go, yeah, it's changed, but we're getting smarter, we're getting more resilient. So it is shifting. You may not see it widespread with first responders, military, but in fact, we know what's changed in the Army because of that model shift on resilience that they teach in the Army. In the U.S. Army, they're teaching diet, they're teaching them emotional intelligence, they're teaching them HeartMath, they're teaching it sleep habits. So all these new things are starting to trickle down because the bean counters, the people who do financial analysis, who do return on investment, realize, healthier soldiers want more longevity, better service, you have less dropouts or less behavioral incidents. So when you start getting the financial people involved in your decision making and they see that wellness is the way to go, if you want to have a productive workforce, it is trickling down. It can't help, let alone the advances in neuroscience. The world is changing. It doesn't always seem it if you read the news, but there's big shifts happening, and I have enough Australian contacts now to realize, it's pretty darn good over there too, even though you may not see it overtly in some of the people you talk to.
Yeah. Yeah, and like you were saying, in the military, the Green Berets, the Navy SEALs and stuff, those advanced, units, they realise they've got to go to their inner CEO. It's this inside me is my CEO. I've got to tap in, and I can tap in, and it's the edge. It's like, all these other countries aren't studying this stuff yet. If we get into this, we're going to become more effective, more efficient. We're going to come home alive, and we're going to succeed. And those guys have ego, and it's like, hey, you can appeal to their ego if you want this invisible edge that others don't have. It's just your superpower sort of thing.
It's self-empowerment. I'll tell you one more story that's relevant. It's a research study. We've been doing a lot of work with the U.S. Navy, and the U.S. Navy is building these multi-billion-dollar destroyer ships that are sophisticated and just wall-to-wall computers. And you've got these 19, 20-year-olds who are on these computer monitors, learning very complex language and systems with a lot of accountability. And there was a high burnout rate among these young recruits, these young sailors. So we went in and did some coherence training, and it was published research. And they saw a lot less errors in performance, a lot less drops in morale, improved communication, improved relationships, statistically significant in the research paper. So again, people are starting to connect the dots in a way that they go, this makes sense. It's not the whole thing. It's not the whole thing. Each individual is going to be different. They can choose to do it or not. Sometimes it's genes. Sometimes it's the environment you're raised in, which carries a lot of stress or even trauma with it. But by and large, we're seeing these major shifts happening culturally. They don't always make the newspapers again, as I show, but it's a lot of think tanks now are realizing this, that you need this kind of holistic approach, whether you call it holistic or not, if you want well-being of people and individuals.
Yeah, I've got 4 adult sons, and I always told them...
Four adult sons?
Yeah, yep. And I said, one of your biggest assets you're ever going to have in the workplace is simply being a nice person to be around. It's so hard to find people in the workplace that you enjoy being around. And so if you follow these methods, looking inward and, it will make you a nicer person to be around. Your employer will think, I don't want to lose this guy. I want them to stay here. They will send you away on classes. They will pay for your education. Because they want to keep you there, and they want you to rise up the ladder to manage more people because you're nice to be around, you're reliable, all those sort of things. So I always said to them, education's expensive, and if your employer is going to volunteer to pay to send you away on things simply because you are friendly, you smile, you're nice to be around, everybody, you get on well with everybody, they're going to want to keep you, and they're going to want you trained to a higher level, and it will happen. But if you don't, if you don't understand what you and I are talking about, and you're grumpy all the time, you're not interested in what you eat, you just want a packet of chips or something, you're just going to not have no interest in what you're putting into your body and how that's going to affect you, not sleeping properly, not talking to people nicely, being down on yourself. People, like, the boss is not going to go, oh, you're my ideal leader, here, I'll send you away on a class. It's, so just the self-care of our inner world is so important. And like you say, people are starting to recognize it these days. Yeah.
So the big question, Doug, is, did they listen to you?
Yes, they did. They did.
Great.
Yeah.
Kindness and civility and listening and respect can go a long way in a work culture, any kind of culture. We do something really here interesting in HeartMath. We'll do these simple heart-focused breathing techniques to start the day or before a meeting. 3 minutes. And you're just trying to get coherent, not thinking about your agenda, but you're being ready to be your best version of yourself, which means being kind or respectful, even though you might have to assert a point, even though there's disagreements that inevitably come with different points of view. And one other thing I think is really important in this day and age is compassion. Self-compassion. It's hard. It's harder to be a human being in 2026 than it was earlier. There's so much noise, so much chaos. You've got technology driving us nuts. AI is just, and I'm an hour from the heart of Silicon Valley. Facebook and Intel and Apple and whatnot. And it's advancing at breakneck speed. So that has consequences like that. So we're going to lose it. We're going to have foul moves. We're going to have a meltdown. That goes for the territory. So we teach a tool called reset. Is when you've got upset or mad, or you got yelled at someone, or you made a big calculation mistake of some sort. There's consequences. Whether you do your apologies or not, don't forget to apologize to yourself and have some compassion. So you kind of breathe in compassion. Try not to linger too much into the shame or guilt, and do what we call a fresh start. Leave the past behind as best you can, unless you're an axe murderer or did something like that. Most of us aren't. You go forward with a renewed outlook and try not to bring the mistake, the guilt, the blame, whatever it may be, into the next situation, because our histories accumulate. And it's really fascinating to actually look at relationships and how they work. And been married for a long time, you know that you kind of perceive each other in a certain way. You have a history based on all your experiences. But that can get in the way of having a fresh look, kind of being in the moment without your agenda, without your histories, without your perceptions, and see things in a new way. And that's where intuition comes in. If you can kind of quiet the brain a little bit, be still and know, you can listen to your heart. You have to listen to it. It's a feeling of what's right, what's the appropriate response here. It's not always crystal clear, by far it isn't. There's different kinds of intuition, they play out in different ways, but it's that intuitive intelligence, which is now emerging more as an intelligence past the cognitive intelligence, is another way of seeing things, maybe from a holistic perspective. So if you look at like the brain can kind of see the tree, the intuition can see the forest. You can see the big picture, or what the military calls situational awareness. What's going on in the immediate environment? What's happening there? There's like an environmental sensitivity. Who's this person? What's their agenda? What are they feeling? What's being expected here? What are the objectives in this meeting? Who's all here? What are their histories? You kind of all gather that intuitively and find kind of a proper presence. if you will, to contribute as best you can, but with that kindness that you alluded to earlier, which makes it, if you look at the way the brain's structured, any kind of an edge of frustration or criticism that triggers that lower brain. And that goes into kind of a hidden defensive posture. And then the listening starts breaking down. You can't make a point because the other person's defensive and they start countering you with maybe some blames or slants, whatever it might be. So communication is a complicated process. We study it on the energetic level, not just the body language, not just the words, but we look at kind of the histories. And how do you really have deep heart communication? It's a rare skill. It's an elite skill that takes a lot of practice. And I've been married for 30 years, so I know a thing or two about that.
I got 41 years married.
Hey, it's sir, and 4 sons who are nice. High five on that, Doug. High five.
Yeah. So when you were talking there about meetings and agendas, I was thinking how important that is, because you could, you got to prep to go into this meeting and you've got 5 agenda points and it's like, these first 3, I have to get my say in, because so-and-so is going to not want this, I've got to really push this. But if you go into that meeting mindfully and, you're letting everything that we've just talked about happen and you're not going in, you might get in there and you just let other people start talking and start to realize, hey, points 4 and 5 on my little list of things to discuss here are actually far more important than those first 3. And now I've just heard Jeff speak about this, that, and the other. I'm actually not even going to raise point 3 because, it would be quite inappropriate, because I'm sitting listening, I'm being intuitive, and I'm letting my heart coherence, work. And so I'm tuning in to the universe, and it's sort of hinting that points 4 and 5 are worth talking about very much. Let's just forget about those first 3 that half an hour ago I thought were the most important things for everybody to discuss today. And the outcome of the meeting, everyone's happy, and you're like, oh, wow, I just dodged a huge bullet there. It would have been a big mistake to talk about that. Right. I've now also not got lumbered with 4 hours of work from that meeting because 2 other people put their hands up and said, I'd like to do this, I'll do that. And it's like, and they're actually probably better at it than I would be anyway. And normally the boss would just dump it on me. That worked really well. Wow. And so you go in there.
There's you can loosely call it energy economy, how you spend your energy. And it's very intuitive. It's kind of like, Bob Dylan had that famous saying, he said, you don't need the weatherman to figure out which way the wind is blowing. And so you can kind of sense the pulse of the room, the energy dynamics, who's speaking, who's pushing, who's retreating, and find your appropriate places there. And that takes some heart intelligence to kind of see that without being stuck in your head with, I've got to do points 1, 2, 3, and then to pivot away from points 1, 2, 3 to actually say, points 4 and 5 are actually more important. And there's an energy efficiency for me doing that, because if I spoke up about points 1, 2, 3, I'm going to be landed with more work, which I can't do right now, but I'll gladly follow through with points 4 and 5. So that's where intuition, being able to kind of see into the pulse of the room, is so important. But it takes practice to do that, because we think there's an insecurity driving you. I've got to perform. I've got to push my agenda. That's the only way they're going to listen. Otherwise, they're not going to listen. That isn't necessarily true. They may not even hear you if your points are spoken with that assertive quality. Because remember, the brain gets that, and it goes into kind of a reactive defensive mode on very subtle levels.
Yeah. Something you mentioned earlier too that was quite relevant to me. You talked about diet. People, you're talking about sleep and things like that. Probably 15 plus years ago, I had a little bit of an epiphany and changed, and I read a book and quite radically changed what I was eating. And I tried to exclude as much processed food as possible from what I was eating. And I continue it on to this day. And I eat as much fresh fruit and vegetables and make, I make very little of it. I'm very good at consuming food. My wife is the food preparer. We're trying, and she's very good at making as many things as possible now from scratch, which is time consuming. but it's beneficial. And it's, she does it so often, she's very quick at it. And she actually, just up the road is a government school camp, mostly some for high schoolers, mostly elementary school age. And she works in the kitchen. So she's a whiz at preparing a lot of food quickly. And so, yeah, and that change of what went in my mouth, what I was eating and drinking, I didn't think at the time I was overweight. But in 2.5 months, I dropped nearly 25 pounds just without trying to lose weight at all. I thought I'm probably going to lose 5 pounds here doing this. And the weight fell off me. My wedding ring got loose. It was like, wow.
I didn't know fingers could lose weight. I guess they did.
No, I didn't either until it started nearly flopping off. And but after maybe 2 to 3 months, my clarity of thought changed. I saw the world differently. It was like, oh, okay, this is interesting now. I was picking up different information, and I was viewing old information differently and processing this new information that was coming to me. And it wasn't voices in my head. It was just my perception of the world changed. And so, I find diet to be a very important part of life, and not dieting, trying to lose weight, but what you consume is
and just you make a really good point. There's kind of an emotional component to eating. A lot of us want that comfort food, which is full of sugar and salt, and it gets addictive and want to do it again and again and again. But then you pause and you look at the results. I'm a little sluggish. I weigh a little more than I need to or I'd like to. I should go on a diet, but who wants to do that? So you can make these little adjustments in your diet that kind of slow down in the eating process. They call it mindful eating, or just pause a little bit and enjoy the food. And you'll see that the sugar, salt components in food, which the food manufacturers like to put in because they get good marks and more purchases. That's not necessarily healthy in the long run like that. But it takes, again, that kind of that listening to the intuition, that pause, that evaluation. Who am I? Where am I going? What's most important to me? Diet's a big thing, but so are my relationships, so is my internal mental health, and let alone what I contribute to the larger community. So it's all these components working together to us stem from kind of a core heart coherence. Because if you don't have that heart coherence, or however you language it, you can go on a diet trend, but it won't sustain itself, because when there's an emotional flop, you go back to comfort food or someone else is eating it and you don't have the discipline to do so. So there is a self-empowerment or a self-awareness that's really critical for sustained diets, unless you have a cook like yourself. I have a cook. My wife's the cook for HeartMath. She is. She's the whiz, much like your wife is. But you need that kind of, if you don't have support in the environment, then you're going to have some voice inside yourself that decides what's best for me here, because it's all about balance. It's not about having complete vegan or complete meat eating. It's all the balance, because food is there for love. That's what my wife taught me. There's great foods that are kind of on the little too much cheese, too much gluten, whatever. But you do it occasionally, just like you have an occasional drink of wine or alcohol or whatever it may be. So it's all about balance, which is a nice cliche word, but it's like there's a balance in each moment to have. And it just takes that self-awareness and that pause in the moment, the slowing down from our habitual brain. Remember, the brain is a pattern-making machine. It takes experience, informs a conclusion unconsciously, and then those become presets of when you navigate about the world. They kind of act as filters in your decision-making process. And that means you kind of cut off the rest of your body from listening in the moment, what's intuitively or situationally appropriate like that. Same with food, same with our relationships, same with how we respond to everything. So it's kind of a critical pivot point here, what we call this heart coherence. But it takes work and practice, so you just don't press a button to do it.
Yeah, recently probably 6 months ago, I went to a naturopath and talked to her about a few things happening with my body. And just in the conversation, I mentioned about the podcast, and she said, "Oh, what's it about?" I said, "Oh, I'm helping men to, recognize their intuition and develop." She said, "Oh, yeah." And so talking about this thing, and then a couple of minutes later, she sort of just turned to me and she said, "So, Doug, you've got this podcast where you talk to men about intuition. What does your intuition tell you about what you've come to me for? Like, this eating thing, I'm like, Smarty, I'm here paying you to do this, and now you're putting it back. And she was perfect. Like, the question was perfect. It was, and I knew my own answer. And she said, all right. She goes, oh, I was sort of thinking it was that. And it was something that I was eating that I've always considered is helped keep me off sugar and keep me healthier. But it's a particular thing that I was eating to excess. And I knew I was, but I was in denial of it because it's a comfort food for me, and I love it. And to me, it's a healthy thing, but in balance. So she said, well, we'll do this little test and like we're going to exclude a couple of foods, and we'll exclude that one and just see if things change. And so when I saw her months later, it was like, yeah, she goes, it came down to it that I was just eating 10 times more of that thing than I should have been. So now it was just self-discipline, and I knew, but I denied it, and I wanted to get someone to confirm that this was what it was, because I didn't want to give it up. But I'm a lot happier and healthier now that I've eat 1/10 of what I used to eat of it. And interesting. And it was great to talk to someone who was interested in my medical health, who was very happy to talk about intuition with what what was going on. And I don't normally get that when I go to my normal doctor to get skin checks, because we have a lot of I live in a fairly tropical climate here, and so every 6 months we get a skin check. That doctor, if I started talking to him about intuition, he'd be like, next, let's have a look at the next little spot. He just would. Yeah. So it's nice to have someone who's interested in your body on your sort of wavelength. Yeah. So, but I find that very, very important. And when you get a medical provider like that, and start talking about what you're talking about, sleep, things like that, how's that going, and all these basic building blocks of life help us tap into these unseen realms. So, yes. All right. So one final question for you. With all of the things that HeartMath have come up with since 1991, can you tell us what's the latest thing you guys are working on? Have you got any new innovations, things coming out?
Yeah, let's call it the science of interconnectivity. And what we're doing is we developed some technological devices. One is a tree monitor, where you put electrodes on a tree, and trees are very sensitive to water, sun. But we also recommend, and we had some help with a NASA nerd down the street, they're sensitive to changes in the environment. So the hypothesis there is that trees are sensitive to human beings. And how we measure, they have the electrical signals, so you can put electrodes on them and you put a little monitor. And what we did some experiments, and this is going to be pretty far out for a lot of your listeners. But we conducted a scientific experiment, 4 maple trees, and we're sending heart love to one maple tree. There's 10 of us. We did this multiple times, and the tree receiving the love showed remarkable changes in their electrical frequencies compared to the other 3 trees. Then we did that remotely with 300 people on a Zoom call. Same results. So there's something in the energetic field that we think picks up on human emotion. Every time the heart beats, because it's 60 times stronger electrically than the brain, it sends up electromagnetic waves at least 3 feet outside of the body. We think more. And and if you look at what emotion is, emovere, which in the Latin means to move out, we hypothesize that these signals coming from the heart, there are emotions riding on those waves. So we're emoting, we're feeding the field. There's this interactivity going on. So we've demonstrated with trees, and we've got about 100 tree monitors around the country, including several in Australia. And we're monitoring those 24/7, just brand new. And we've only done some experiments, but we're looking for events where there's mass human emotion, like a war, an earthquake, a war breaking out, or a celebration. So that's the tree monitor. We've got about 100 of those out. We call it the science of interconnectivity. The more interesting, not the more interesting one, but another one is called random number generators, or Global Consciousness Project 2.0. A man named Roger Nelson from Princeton University for years was measuring through what's called a random number generator, and I'll explain what that is. He was measuring mass human emotion for large events. 9/11, Global Peace Day, the World Soccer Cup. And so he retired, he passed it on to us, and we developed a new set of computers that are kind of on top of one another. And what these random number generators are, they continually spin out random numbers. 0011, 0111110, just random numbers, 0 or 1. And what we found definitively now, and 20 events, that when there's a large-scale event, the random number generators stop being random at 1,000,000,000,000 to 1 odds. And we just published a paper on that. And we saw it with the wildfires of Los Angeles. We saw it with the start of the Gaza war. We saw it with the release of the Israeli hostages. We saw it with Pope Leo, with 1,000,000 teenagers in the Vatican Square doing some kind of a long prayer. So these are instruments, the technologies that develop, that measure what we call energetic communication. It's at that quantum level. It's still science, it's measuring something. We don't know fully how it works. We only can hypothesize that when the heart beats, it sends out fields. And when you have a lot of people together, their emotion rides on those waves, and you get a mass signal that it can be picked up by a tree monitor or one of these random number generators. So I would say the science of interconnectivity is the one that's looming large, that we just finished doing a research study with Joe Dispenza, very definitive results, 2,000 people in a room, and they all at one point sent heart or love to a group of 30 people, all being measured through what are called bodyguards, measures 24/7 heart rate variability. Very distinctive difference, and that was just published in a peer-reviewed journal article. So this is pushing the envelope. This is on the edge of research. We're pretty excited about where this is going. Just like we started with heart rate variability research and coherence research 3 decades ago, we were going up against the grain, and that's now finally not just what our contributions, but many other contributions. HRV is now a pretty well-defined metric for your physiological, let alone your emotional well-being. And likewise, the science of interconnectivity and how we all affect each other in the field is that next frontier that we're taking.
Amazing.
It is.
Wow, yeah. And like you're saying, it's just showing us how connected we all are. And, these bodies we see on the outside, and we judge our own bodies, we judge other people's because they're different, their hair color's different, their skin color, the shape of their eyes are different, and we judge. But really, what's within the heart, etc., is probably not much different to each other, and we're connected, and we have an effect on the world that we don't realize. That's amazing. Yeah. And have you ever heard of, I think it's Dr. David Hawkins. Have you heard of him at all?
Yes. I forget the name of his book. I read it like 30 years ago. But yeah.
Power versus Force. And he's got a few other books out. And something in there he talks about is where he he then has his scale of 1 to 1,000, and you know, when you're over 200, you're kind of on a more enjoyable life. If you're below 100, life's not going so crash hot. But what I'm getting at in there is he was feeling that there's a handful of people who are he would put on this scale like in the, you know, 500, 800 out of 1,000, for however what he's measuring there. And those people are, there's not like thousands of them on the planet, but their presence on the planet is able to affect in a positive way tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people. And so maybe that's the reason they came to the planet, was to help uplift. They were born into certain geographical locations to help uplift the people around them. And this sort of thing you're talking about helps me, you know, think, wow, that makes, when you start to bring the information together, it makes sense. Yeah. It's an amazing time to be alive, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It's not boring. I tell my kids, I go, mate, when I was in my 20s, life was really, really boring compared to now, even though I thought at the time it was interesting and exciting. But there's just, And actually on that, my older son's just turned 40, and we were having a conversation out in the yard the other day and about this has happened, that's happened, this has happened, and we were like, oh, wow, you know. And then I said to him, but mate, with all that, like, there's so many other crazy good things, just like the conversation we're having now, like all these other new, and he's like, you're right, Dad, they are. There is all this amazing, you know, as bad as the perception is things are, really, there's the balance on the other side that amazing things are happening as well. It just depends where you put your attention. So, yeah. All right, so I'm going to have contact details for you in the show notes. So apart from that, is there anything we haven't talked about that you'd like to mention that's important that you think before we wind up?
No, I think we covered a lot of ground, Doug, and I like your contributions and interactivity, and I welcome any emails or contact information. We're just enjoying the ride, being HeartMath and doing it for 35 years. And there's still a bunch of us around who were there at the beginning. And we keep on growing individually as people. We practice what we preach. We want to be authentic, not pretentious. And likewise, we're just getting some, as the world turns and there's more evolution and more awareness, kind of a waking up going on, if you will. We're enjoying that ride as well, because we get to have really interesting conversations every day with interesting people in various parts of the world that are doing really, really interesting things. It's not unusual for me to talk to, via Zoom, 5 people from international countries other than the United States. So we're much more a global information society, and we're crossing barriers that was unthinkable in a more provincial state maybe 30 years ago. So the world is waking up. It's evolving. It's also got a boatload of stress and anxiety, and that's improved materially in some ways. You could talk about the climate crisis, that's another matter. But mentally, we're seeing the stress levels rise as people try to cope with this almost unmanageable world we live in. Yeah. So it takes that level, it's forcing people to go deeper inside themselves, into their heart, to go, who am I, what's most important? What do I need for myself, my family, my environment to be a better human being? We're starting to have those conversations what were unthinkable a couple of decades ago, and we've been at it for 35 years. So we've got a good sense of a timeline, and we're at good front row seats to all these different people doing really interesting things around the world in many, many different industries. We hear from them. We see what's going on. We see how they apply HeartMath in their various circles. So we're really enjoying the ride.
Good. Thank you for your contribution and all that you've put into HeartMath, etc., and all the benefits that you've brought to many people around the world. Thank you for that.
Thanks for inviting me, Doug, and thanks for keeping on.
No worries. Thanks, Jeff. Well, we're at the end of another thought-provoking episode. Remember to subscribe so you'll be alerted to new episodes. I want to say thank you to the men who are joining me on this journey of intuitive development. I truly hope our time together has expanded your reality and reinforced trust in your ever-reliable gut feeling. Embrace your intuition. It will not lead you astray. Until next time, stay tuned, stay curious, and trust your gut.